Now our next session, What's Missing? Rethinking What It Takes to Decarbonize Mobility. Please welcome Sandra Phillips, Senior Vice President, Enterprise Integrity, Chief Sustainability Officer, Chief Legal Officer, Toyota Motor North America.
So good morning and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Sandra Phillips and I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for Toyota Motor North America. And at Toyota, our mission is producing happiness for all. And that means more than building vehicles. It's about creating a better future for our customers, our communities, and partners around the world, including future generations, ensuring that no one is left behind. Now, we are deeply committed to our goals of carbon neutrality, including focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions through our multi-pathway approach. But we cannot do it alone. Our world is diverse and meaningful progress requires inclusive, localized solutions tailored to the unique needs of different regions. And that's why our strategy is global, but implemented country by country. So today we are very excited to share Toyota's unique approach in collaboration with our partners. And so to kick things off, it's my honor to introduce Dominique Finn from the Climate Group, who will help us explore a critical question. Are we moving fast enough? Thank you all and enjoy the session.
Thank you.
Our next session, Scene Setting, is Mobility on Track for Net Zero. Please welcome Dominic Finn, Head of Transport, the Climate Group.
Good morning, everybody. Really pleased to be here to provide a few opening remarks to today's session on this very interesting topic, very timely topic. My name is Dominic Finn. I'm the Head of Transport at Climate Group. Climate Group is the convener of Climate Week, but we also have identified several focus areas where we see a real need to reduce carbon emissions to get to net zero by 2050. Systems like food, energy, industrial processes, and transport, which is the project that I lead. We have projects across 10 different markets globally, so hopefully that gives a good vantage point for me to just provide a few reflections on the nature of the pathway to decarbonize transport and set up the more detailed discussions which are to follow. So the question, are we moving fast enough? Well, the main point I'd like to make to kick off is that road transport is the second largest source of greenhouse emissions after coal. It makes up around a fifth of global emissions. If road transport was a country, it'd be the fifth largest emitter in the world. It's a huge emitter and sometimes overlooked. And the worrying trend is that it's increasing. International Transport Forum modelling predicts that without any other changes to the current policy frameworks, transport emissions will continue to rise up to 2050. So we've seen a trajectory of increasing transport emissions, and we need to tackle this quick. EV100 is the main initiative that we convene at Climate Group around transport, and it works with large fleets primarily, and they are looking to electrify their fleets as a key way to drive down emissions from their road transport operations. And EVs, a couple of great examples in the lobby here from General Motors are noted, and they're talked about a lot as a key solution, and of course they are. They are a really effective way to reduce carbon emissions. The life cycle emissions from electric vehicles are a really crucial way to reduce carbon, but they're also becoming increasingly affordable and available in a variety of different use cases, and that's reflected in market uptake across a variety of different markets, not just advanced markets, but new markets around the world. So a really crucial tool to rely on. But as we're going to dig into today, it's not enough on its own just to rely on electric vehicles, we need to look at a mosaic of different solutions. The vehicles that are already in operation is really important. How do we reduce the number of vehicles on the road, just in general, shared transport, etc. But also, how do we look at other ways to kind of to change behaviour essentially? So we're working with demand side from companies, but also individuals, consumers. How do we empower consumers to behave differently and travel differently? So we really need to look at these variety of different solutions. That's going to be what you're going to hear about today from the panels of experts. So I will leave it there, leave it to the experts, but just to say, I hope you all really enjoy the sessions, and thank you very much for your attention.
Please welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Gil Pratt, Chief Scientist, Toyota Motor Corporation, and CEO, Toyota Research Institute.
Hi, everybody. It is my great pleasure to be here with you today. What I'm going to talk about is how customer pull can help to mitigate climate change. So every single one of us knows, I hope, the difficulty of the problem that we face. The climate is getting worse, it's going to continue to get worse, and we have to do something about it. Now, even more difficult is that there is the swinging political pendulum that is pushing back on our efforts, and we have to solve this problem too. It's not only a technical problem, it's a problem of human relationships also. Now, luckily, the news is not all bad. Here's a report that came out very recently about carbon emissions from China. As many of you know, China emits more CO2 than the US and Europe combined, but there is some hope that it looks like it's leveling off. And that's what you see here on the left-hand side. There seems to be a plateau that's occurring. And the reason it's occurring is because of the increase of renewable energy sources that you see in the lower right-hand side. So that's the good news. The other good news is that many companies, and you've heard many of them today, and it includes Toyota, are sticking to their climate plans. And for us, this is how we discuss it. But there are still challenges that we need to face. So this chart over here shows the trend in the increase of the average age of cars within the United States. And as you can see, the average age of cars that are in the fleet, the vehicles in operation, continues to go up, and if anything, is accelerating. So people are holding on to their cars for longer. And if that's not bad enough, this is the distribution of those ages. And a remarkable thing is that over 20% of US cars are over 21 years old. So there are a lot of old cars on the road, and they are emitting a lot of CO2. And this is a problem that is not only bad in the US, but if you look at what happens to cars that are used in the US, after their life here, they then go on to the developing world, and the age distribution gets even worse. So we have to solve this problem in a global way. So how do we keep ourselves positive and optimistic about the future? Well, I'd like to discuss with you in a very short time that I have here a very old idea from Toyota, which has to do with manufacturing. Over 80 years ago, Toyota and other companies in Japan went through very, very hard times. And the traditional way that manufacturing is done is that you'd make a prediction of what the demand of the marketplace would be, and then you would manufacture a volume in proportion to that prediction. Always a little bit more to make sure that you didn't run out. And this was called the push system. It's what you see on the left-hand side of this chart here. Over 80 years ago, Toyota came up with an opposite to this, which was the Toyota production system, and it's the pull system that you see on the right. Instead of producing things in anticipation of customer demand, you wait for the customer to pull to say, I want to buy this car, and then you make things just in time based on customer demand. And it's a very different mindset, a different way of doing things. Well, I believe that as we deal with these problems, both the human problem and also the technical problem, we can think about public policy very much like a push system. It's a command and control, top-down, we anticipate what kind of products the customer is going to want, and we set the policy based on that anticipation. The problem with this is that you end up with excess inventory. And so if we take a look, here's a BEV that's sitting on a dealer lot. And the question is, if it is unsold, what's the total amount of CO2 emissions that this is saving? And the answer is not only zero, because it's not saving any CO2 as it sits there, but it also has consumed resources and emitted CO2 during its manufacture. And it also has an opportunity cost because we did not replace an older vehicle that customers are holding on to with a newer vehicle that emits less CO2. And this is particularly true if you look at the miles per gallon, which is a stand-in for CO2 emissions of vehicles over time. You'll see that modern vehicles are in fact much, much better than older ones. So we should always think about that vehicle that a customer is holding on to for longer as being a serious source of the problem, because it's far back on this curve and emitting a lot of CO2. So how can we have a pull system? How can we encourage our customers? How can we encourage everybody to do their part to help with carbon dioxide emissions reduction? Well, I'm going to tell you what our philosophy is. And I know that it's somewhat controversial, but it, I think, is becoming to be shown that this is in fact not only a pragmatic way of doing it, but it's also a way of maximizing carbon dioxide emissions as much as possible and as soon as possible. We offer a wide range of different powertrains. We don't try to tell the customer what to do. Rather, we try to have every single one of these paths have the lowest possible CO2 emissions output. And what that means is that in countries where there is high demand, in geographies where we have high demand for BEVs, we sell a lot of BEVs. And even organizations that typically are quite critical of the car industry say that these BEVs are in fact quite good. In other places where, for whatever reason, customer demand is less, we sell the highest mile per gallon hybrid vehicles that we possibly can. In the US, this has now risen to over 50% of the new vehicles that we sell are hybrid vehicles. And this is an extraordinarily good thing. We don't have to have perfect be the enemy of good. And there's PHEVs. Now this is a chart here where in blue on the left-hand side, you see the adoption of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles in blue on top of the adoption of battery electric vehicles. Different parts of the world have different adoption rates. And even organizations which, again, tend to be quite critical of the auto industry say that this method actually makes sense. So what about the problem of PHEVs being plugged in? Some critics say, well, PHEVs tend not to be plugged in, so they're really not the equivalent of battery electric vehicles. This is a picture of my son. He's 13 years old. For his whole life, he has loved the task of plugging in our PHEV. And so for us, the so-called utility factor of how often that vehicle gets plugged in is very, very high. But how about for everybody else? Well, you're going to hear in a following session here a remarkable study that we did recently where we provided some behavioral science cues, some reminders, to help customers who bought that PHEV because they wanted to reduce CO2 emissions. They wanted to help the environment, to remind them that this is something that they have to remember to do. Go ahead and plug in that vehicle. And we have done tests, and the results of those are quite encouraging, showing that there is a way to raise utility factor for PHEVs. And the most remarkable thing is that it's not the kind of push reminder that people feel is a nag that makes them not like their vehicle anymore, but it's a pull reminder, and it makes them like their vehicle better than they liked it before because they're getting to contribute to the solution to climate change. In the same way, it turns out that in certain parts of the world where there's a lot of solar energy, the best time to charge your car is not at night when that solar energy is not available, but in some parts of the world it's during the day when it's in fact the better way to charge your car if you care about the environment. And so this very same behavioral science tool we have shown, and this is an example in Japan where that's true, that it results in significant behavioral change to people choosing the time when they charge their car, even though charging during the day is less convenient than charging at night. And so we believe that there's a lot of ways to help to influence people in a very positive way to pull, to say, I want to help with climate change, and our job is to facilitate how they can do it. So to wrap this up, remember the push system and the pull system. Of course, we need public policy. We need a push system top down to help to make the environment better and to help with climate change. But we also need a pull system, and this is something that we don't think has been adequately addressed up until now, to enable, to facilitate customers who want to do good. People in general want to help with climate change, and we feel that our job as manufacturers is to enable them to do it. So let me conclude with this slide here, a very beautiful sculpture of two hands grasping each other. We believe that by holding hands together with the public, with our customers, that we can in fact enable a solution to climate change in the future. Thank you all so very much.
Our first panel discussion, how do we incentivize solutions, a systems approach to resilient decarbonization? We welcome our moderator, Tom Stricker, Group Vice President for Regulatory Affairs and Environmental Sustainability, Toyota Motor North America.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to my panel for being here. As you heard, my name is Tom Stricker, Group Vice President for Regulatory Affairs and Environmental Sustainability at Toyota North America. And as you would expect in that role, my teams are responsible for our environmental and safety vehicle regulatory strategies, as well as developing our environmental action plans across our business to support our global environmental objectives. And that's enough about me. In this first panel, I have the privilege of leading a distinguished group through a high-level discussion about opportunities for more resilient decarbonization of the transportation sector. We will tap into our panelists' unique perspectives on how to approach and how to incentivize reductions across the value chain. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our panel members today. To my left is Yumi Otsuka, and she is the General Manager of Sustainability Management for Toyota Motor Corporation. Thanks, Yumi. Next to Yumi is Dominic Ware, who's Executive Vice President for WBCSD. Thank you, Dominic, for being here. And on the far end, we have Esther Finidori, who is Chief Sustainability Officer for Schneider Electric. So again, thank you all for joining the panel today. Let me start with the lens a little bit wider here at the beginning and talk a bit about your overall approaches as companies, Yumi-san and Esther, to slow growth of emissions from transport, and then how WBCSD's work in this area supports businesses in helping to move the needle in this area. So Yumi-san, first question for you. We're certainly seeing advances in vehicle technologies and fuels technologies, and that's undoubtedly leading to a slowing in the growth of emissions. But what else do we need to do from your perspective to accelerate reductions in this sector and actually start to bend that curve a little bit more?
Okay, thank you, Tom. I'd like to share two key messages. So first, I believe done is better than perfect. So the key is to start making progress today, even with small steps. We can tackle challenges after we start action. So our vision, achieving net zero while with no one left behind, is incredibly challenging. So we need to mobilize every possible solutions and deploy them where they fit. For example, hydrogen-powered electric vehicle, or the FCEVs, are well suited for commercial vehicles. This is because hydrogen as an energy source is lightweight. So even when carrying larger amount for longer distances, it doesn't add significant weight compared to BEVs, nor does it reduce available space. So furthermore, hydrogen refueling time is notably shorter. So as for commercial vehicles, improving logistic efficiency is also a promising measure today. because that is also good for cost saving and better for drivers, and even shorter the delivery time. So, as Gil mentioned in the keynote, we need to find the solutions which customers are willing to implement. So, customer pull approach. Yeah. So that's why Toyota is exploring and investing in various technologies and in innovations. By doing so, it's committed to pragmatically achieving decarbonization as quickly and as much as possible through a combination of various powertrains and energies. Second, I believe we need a new holistic framework to evaluate various decarbonization efforts. I'm afraid that life cycle assessment to assess total greenhouse gas emissions is not widely understood yet. So we must consider not only GHG emissions generated during product use, but also those emitted during the production and disposal. Also, we must pay attention to the carbon intensity of the energy required to use the products. What matters is that the concept of LCA promotes cross-industry efforts. Furthermore, currently, only zero-emission products and services are valued. But I find it strange that solutions contributing to the reduction of societal total GHG emissions are not fairly valued. Let me provide an example. In 2024, Toyota sold over 10 million vehicles worldwide. While we are increasing the sales of battery EVs or hybrid vehicles also significantly contribute to the reduction of GHGs, especially in the countries where the electricity is not clean enough. However, while Toyota's less carbon-intensive solutions contribute to the society, our Scope 3 GHG emissions increase. So this highlights the limitation of the current GHG protocol, which prioritizes zeroing out emissions. So as mentioned already, no single solution fits all. So we need a way to incentivize and then measure the reduction contribution of technology and services which are advancing the transition.
Great, thanks, Imi-san. I think it's interesting. You said done being better than perfect, and I think depending on where you come from, the expression "don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good" is also an interesting way to capture that sentiment. And it is related closely to how do we value emissions reductions, even if they're not zero emissions, while we're driving towards those zero emissions. And I think we'll circle back on that here in a moment. But Esther, I did want to turn to you. Schneider Electric's in a different part of the equation here, but interested from your perspective, kind of how you're seeing the overall approach to emissions reductions.
So, as a company, we're a manufacturing company. And I would highlight two of our priorities in terms of driving decarbonization, and I will echo, I think, a lot of what Yumi-san has said. The first priority that we're concentrating on is to deliver very sharp reduction of our Scope 1 and 2 emissions. And to do that, there are two levers: efficiency and electrification. And these technologies, they're available. Especially on the electrification side, we are switching our fleet to electric cars. And where I can relate, Yumi-san said, it's important we make the solutions that our customers will be able to adopt and to implement. On this electrification journey, the biggest challenge or the biggest work has been around adoption of those new technologies, because when you electrify your fleets, it profoundly challenges the way you organize work, the scheduling, the working hours, the routes. So you need to work on how you organize the work in order to implement that technology. Yet it's worth it. We've now achieved more than a third of our fleet, professional fleet, that is electrified, and we're on our way to 100% by 2030. So, we can implement those changes now, and it's working. Our second priority is, we implement efficiency technologies in our factories. We electrify our processes, we electrify our fleets. And then we help our suppliers do the same. So we've been focusing a lot on capacity building with the supply chain, helping our suppliers, bringing to them the solutions and the practical experience on how do you do it to implement those solutions. And all in all, it's been a very successful journey. We have reduced our scope 1 and 2 emissions by over 70% already, on our way to minus 90% by 2030. And those technologies, they're readily available to reduce emissions.
Great, thank you. It's interesting. At the WBCSD Council meeting on Monday, I heard a number of folks saying, gee, if everybody would just take care of their own scope 1 emissions, we would sort of solve the but it's unfortunately never quite that. But yeah, and the point about suppliers is certainly a key point, because it brings in, our value chain, and depending on your business, the number of suppliers and the global nature of the supply base is immense.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, scope 3 is just the sum of scope 1 and 2 of your entire value chain. So the ability to disseminate those concrete actions is just what's going to make the difference.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. So Dominic, a couple of things. So Yui touched on the concept of how do you fully value emissions reductions as we have a drive towards zero emissions. And then, so I'm wondering from your chair, in terms of WBCSD's efforts around different protocols and other things that you're working on in cooperation with the business community, how you see the synergies and intersections there.
Thanks, Tom, for that, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I really love the title of the session of how do we incentivize solutions. And many of you have been at this for some time, right? And it feels difficult to consistently have to have another commitment or something. And as Esther was saying, and as Yumi-san was saying, kind of driving for the delivery, the implementation bit, and showing those results is, I think, where it's at. And many of you, I'm sure, in the same kind of corporate perspective will know that sometimes, you need a clear regulation, but you also need the incentive, because the board will be saying, if we move, will lower cost of capital follow us, or will we be kind of exposed for being a first mover? For those of you who are deeply enmeshed in things like the greenhouse gas protocol, we've talked about scopes 1 and 2, and you mentioned scope 3. Among my other attributes, I find myself the kind of co-chair and the co-host of the greenhouse gas protocol, but historically it's always been, and it still remains, an inventory of accounts. I did quite well last year compared to 2 years ago, which is a bit like financial accounting. Whereas, as you say in the title here, which is the really important shift in this agenda as capital markets begin to realize that there's a clear business opportunity, as you were saying there, Esther, and Schneider, and you found in Toyota, is if I'm on the investor side, how do I know which company will do better over the next 10 years if they shift their business model? And we don't yet have a standardized guidance for that intervention accounting. That is what we've been working on with our friends from Toyota and Schneider Electric and many others to create a standardized guidance for what is termed avoided emissions. So if I shift my business model and I have a really good plan, it's in my transition plan, over the next 10 years, compared to business as usual, I might get here, like you were saying, Esther, what is that difference? And can I attract those who want to invest in that difference with a lower cost of capital? Then the board kind of wakes up and goes, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. And I'm delighted to say, that took a lot of work, and many of you probably in the audience contributed to that. There was over 60, 70 businesses, some brilliant expert organizations to shake out all the different methodologies, place it in front of decision makers. And when Japan had the G7 presidency in 2023, the energy, environment and climate ministers endorsed that guidance. So that's a really big step, and that woke up the financial community. So now, with your help from our panelists and others, we are creating a standardized guidance for that intervention accounting. Probably will take a couple of years, but key investor platforms like Generation, like Bloomberg, and others are helping. And I tell you what, it's woken up a lot of sector interest. We're delighted to be kind of exploring that on the auto side with the leadership of Toyota, definitely on the engineering and technology side for clean tech. The technology community themselves, think about the kind of challenges around data centers and things like that. but also the financial community to have a standardized approach for how they will invest in your companies. So it's a really practical piece of kit to get the capital into those who really want to see their solutions incentivized.
Yeah, it's a super interesting area because it essentially is a way of rewarding companies for being more efficient perhaps than competitors. It's also a way to recognize new technology entrants into markets that, would lower the profile for, use their technologies and so forth. So at some point, hopefully, consumers also get that mindset shift where they're at this vehicle versus this vehicle from two different manufacturers, and they're going to choose this one. Right. This one's Scope 1 emissions or Scope 3 emissions just went up, but for the environment, insurance. So I think we really do need to find a good...
Yeah, it takes us into driving competitive edge.
Yeah.
Which is where we want to be in terms of what we know we can unlock here. I mean, as these two great companies show.
Yeah. So Esther, I know Schneider has been reporting avoided emissions for quite a while, maybe 5 or 6 years now. What drove you to go in that direction? Kind of what have you learned that you can share as we're starting to get into this topic a little bit more?
Yeah. So the strategic intent was exactly what Dominic described. So we started reporting externally avoided emissions back in 2019. And the idea is we're deeply committed to reduce Scope 1, 2, 3. We have a net zero commitment. We'll have to deliver on that. But we also want to be able to articulate and quantify, not just say it, bring some data behind it on the positive impact that our technology has. At the time, there were no standards, so we took the posture that we would calculate and be extremely transparent about the calculations we're doing, because of course you can have a lot of debates on what's an acceptable reference. If your calculated avoided something, you're comparing yourself to a baseline, so very transparent life cycle analysis type of approach, looking for to capture all impacts. And we felt it was important to bring this quantitative piece of data, all the more since Schneider Electric has a very complex portfolio of technologies, from efficiency to electrification to automatization. And we felt that proving that you can do such calculations if you're a company holding complex technologies like Schneider could help unlock and help other companies embrace the same journey. So we've been doing that for 5 years. We have taken the commitment to deliver 800 million tons of CO2 avoided in the 5-year period, and we're well on our way to deliver that by the end of the year.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great story. So I want to shift gears just a little bit, and low carbon solutions, when we look at them at their face, as they enter the market and so forth, the value of the carbon reductions or the level of carbon reductions that are associated with certain technologies have a whole history behind in terms of how they got to where they are. And it's not just about the product that you're using, it's about how was it made, where was it resourced, how did it get to where it was ultimately sold to a consumer. And the full value chain and life cycle emissions of that product are incredibly important. And it's not just the emissions, it's other environmental impacts that may go along with the production of that product, whether it's impacts on the earth, impacts on water, and so forth. And so, Dominic, I'm going to turn to you and have you talk a little bit about some of the complexities that are inherent in evaluating and valuing these value chain impacts in terms of how we think about what's good or what's not maybe as good as we think.
Yeah, Tom, thank you. I really appreciate the question. It's one of those areas where you could spend forever kind of admiring the problem, or as you were saying, you were kind of getting in there and getting something done. So there is complexity, obviously, in global value chains. We're the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We have about 252 global members as part of our family. Schneider Electric and Toyota are part of them, some of you in the room too. That footprint from accounted emissions on the 2022 baseline in aggregate is about 15 gigatons, about 26% of global greenhouse gas emissions. The opportunity there is huge because 85% plus is accounted for in that value chain. Category 1, Category 11 if you get into the, what I buy and what you sell to me. And the beauty about the Scope 3 piece is that there is double counting. Someone's Scope 1 is someone else's Scope 3. But what it does, it allows you then to zero in on key bits of the value chain where lots of people are engaged in that kind of emission accounting. For example, and you mentioned it, Esther, greening the logistics or taking out a bit of energy. So it's not just about a key investment upstream. You can find all sorts of things downstream, which we know we have the capability to do, and it will drive operational efficiency, lower energy costs, lower resource costs. If we establish the value chain in that perspective, then it becomes really neat because you can layer onto it things like the water or other footprints. So that's the journey that we're going in, but we're pretty excited to be able to work with Toyota, Schneider Electric, and many others to accelerate those emissions right across the value chain by picking off the areas where there's real business value to be had for tackling some of those problems, because everyone's got really cool things that they're doing in their own operations, in their own sphere of influence. But if you imagine we could connect those up, the folks upstream, the folks midstream, the folks downstream, have an accounting mechanism that incentivizes the pull, whether it's a demand pull, whether it's avoided emissions, product carbon footprint upstream for those suppliers, suddenly you've got a market tipping point piece. So it's a pretty interesting 5 years ahead if, and here's the if, we absolutely believe that we really need to go for it on accelerating those emissions and building business value. The if is if we don't, all that is happening at the moment in your boardrooms and in your discussions where people are saying physical risk is a really big issue, physical risk is rising, there are disruptions in our value chains, that's at a 1.1 degree warming world or thereabouts. We can't afford ourselves to get to 3 degrees or more because it's just intolerable. So we have to deal with the physical risk and we have to accelerate those emissions down across the value chain. Otherwise, the turbulence for business operations will just be pretty grim.
Yeah, I think yesterday I heard some statistics about over $300 billion of physical capital, loss every year, and that's up 25%, I think, just in a year or two. It's kind of amazing when you think about it.
But the flip of it is there's so much value to be captured. There's so much kind of operational expenditure that can be reduced. There's a whole innovation agenda. So you focus on that and incentivize solutions as we're talking about here, and we drag ourselves into a pretty cool tomorrow.
Great, thank you, Dominic. So Esther, Schneider has been recognized as the most sustainable company, if I'm getting the verbiage right, so congratulations on that. And I know that you've done a lot in the circular economy space, which is kind of related to some of the issues that Dominic was raising. I'm wondering if you can share with us, again, kind of as a leader in the area, what you've learned from your efforts in there, and then what you think the folks in this room and in the business community need to do and to embrace to also start to become leaders and better practitioners in this area.
Okay, this is going to be frustrating because I won't have enough time to tell you everything I would like to tell you on circular economy. But the way we see it, the way we frame our environmental strategy, first we need to decarbonize, efficiency, electrification for decarbonization. The second thing we really need to do is to circularize the flows of materials, because when we're talking about other environment impact indicators, water, biodiversity, nature, if you circle those loops of materials, you solve a lot of those issues. So decarbonization and circular. And what's very interesting about circular economy, I will link to the presentation you had just before on the Toyota system change from push to pull. It's a massive change to just the way you operate. Because all of a sudden, you get out of this linear chain of suppliers, manufacturer, customers, and you need to have feedback or flows going the other way around. You need to have flows going from the customers to the manufacturer, back potentially to the supplier. And this opens an innovation journey from a business perspective, which is incredible. And for Schneider, when we talk circular, often we talk about waste management. This is very important. For Schneider, this is not at all what it means. For us, it means serviceability of the products. Are we able to serve them, extend prolonged lifetime? It means take back, and when we take back products, are we able to retrofit them and to put on the market second-hand products? but we sell electrical equipment. Second-hand products have to have the exact same quality guarantee than new products. So it's really deep remanufacturing processes and not just a second-hand economy you need to create. So this opens an area of questions which can lead to very deep innovation in terms of business models, and the partners that you're dealing with to build that are very different from your traditional economical partners. So this is a very challenging journey, because it's country per country, it's partnership per partnership, but we think it holds a lot of value both for the environment as well as for our business.
Great, thank you, Esther. So Yumi-san, I think, not that you should top Esther's reply, because I think it would be hard to do, but I'm wondering if you would be able to share some of your thoughts around value chain and circularity from how Toyota's thinking about these issues.
Okay, thank you. We also think the importance of the integrated approach. So we need to consider the beyond GHGs, so nature and then equity and so on. So, for example, we should consider the impact of mining activities for crucial mineral when making materials. So this causes concerns about the harm to environment, the people, community. So therefore, we are advancing the development of batteries that use as few critical minerals as possible. And also, I believe it's necessary to establish the ecosystem and then enhance the recycle of batteries to make the effective use of critical minerals. So I believe this is perfectly in line with that circular economy, as Esther mentioned. So that I also big believer of circular economy, and then the beauty of circular economy lies in how it drives us to rethink our business and then change our business model and then to engage cross value chains. So it's naturally we think about the whole value chain and all stakeholders, and then also the beyond GHGs. And then so these all create a new business opportunity, I believe. Here again, we need a new way of thinking to evaluate such an integrated approach, and then there are several discussions about the KPIs and methodologies, including the Global Circularity Protocol program, in which the WBCS led, and then which Toyota participated. So here, I believe, so again, practical and then easy to implement solutions should be evaluated in our integrated approach.
Yeah, thanks, Yumi-san. We're running up pretty close to the end of time for this part of our panel. So I'd like to ask each of you, if I may, to maybe just in 1 minute or so, if you can capture sort of your takeaway message, your inspiration to the folks around this room and elsewhere, and shed some light on where the hope and progress is going to be in the future here. We really appreciate it. So we'll just go through like a quick lightning round, and then we'll end our session.
Great.
Yeah, Esther, you want to go?
Okay, I'll go first. So my takeaway would be, we see a lot of room for action. I told you we've achieved over minus 70% of reduction in scope 1 and 2 emissions. What I haven't told you is the suppliers we work with, they are achieving minus 50% in 5 years. So there are technologies available that we can adopt now that do deliver incredible results to cut CO2 emissions. So there are those solutions that we're talking about, they exist, they're readily available, and we can implement them right now in our own factories as well as in our supply chain to deliver decarbonization.
Excellent, I like it. Do. Dominic?
Exactly, let's do it.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yumi-san, you mentioned the Global Circularity Protocol. So think of something for circularity, like we have the Greenhouse Gas Protocol for scopes 1, 2, and 3. Common definitions. What is an asset class? And that is something which we're proud to have great sponsorship and support from the government of Japan and also the United Nations Environment Programme and others. So that's a cool piece of kit that's coming down the pipe. I think that generally, I sense in New York Climate Week and in the arena, we're getting into let's get this done phase. So I would say we're moving from a morality to a materiality kind of discussion, because we have so much evidence on what works and how this creates value and how this drives innovation and all the things that we need. And that's the kind of discussion where we can lean in and make things happen. So I would say that's probably a takeaway for me, from morality to materiality.
That's great and easy to remember. I'm gonna pick that one up. Thank you. Yumi-san, last word for you.
Yeah, thank you. So I believe the transition will be accelerated by the mobilization of a wider range of solutions through custom approach. And then we must properly evaluate and incentivize such solution providers, including us, so that they can contribute more effectively to society. And then to echo the Estes and Dominic-san's points, as an action-oriented company focused on delivering a tangible impact, Toyota will continue to demonstrate the leadership in this space. And then actually talking and listening to the nice topics or the nice speeches doesn't solve any problems. So yeah, let's work together. So I believe the future is something we can build together. Thank you.
All right, I think I'm going to end it right there, and we'll exit the stage and allow our second panel to come on up. So thank you all very much, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks.
Our next panel discussion, hidden in plain sight. Can we decarbonize the cars already on the road? We welcome Dr. Madhur Balur, Manager, Carbon Neutral Strategy, Toyota Research Institute.
All right. Hello. Thank you all for joining us. As you've heard, my name is Madhur Balur. I lead our Carbon Neutral Strategy team with the Toyota Research Institute, and I am very excited to be here with you today to bring more awareness to this topic of VIO, this very important opportunity to decarbonize vehicles in operation. Now, you've all heard already from Dr. Gil Pratt that the average age of vehicles on the road is increasing. And this isn't just happening in the US. Around the world, there are over 1.5 billion vehicles currently on the road, and this makes up the vast majority of emissions from on-road transport. And you saw from Gil Pratt's talk that there is an improvement in miles per gallon, fuel economy that we are seeing, but the carbon impact of that at scale is limited if customers continue to hold on to their vehicles for longer. Now, as we and others in the field continue to electrify, which we must, with battery electric vehicles, fuel cell vehicles, plug-in hybrids, and hybrids, these legacy vehicles will continue to be on the road for years and decades to come. So the question for this audience is, what additional efforts can we and others take to try to take what is this climate obstacle and turn it into an opportunity? Is there any way that you can hold on to your car that you love and power it with low carbon or carbon neutral fuels? Is there a way that you can upgrade or retrofit this vehicle with cleaner components, for example, to convert a hybrid to a plug-in hybrid? Or can you swap that vehicle out a little sooner than you would have liked to for a newer, cleaner vehicle? These are questions that are too big for any one company to try and answer alone, to identify the promising solutions and identify the key challenges to overcome. So I'm excited to be joined today by an excellent panel of folks with diverse expertise, because that's what it's going to take to solve this problem, a systems approach like you heard from earlier today. So this is just meant to be the start of the discussion, and I hope we'll have many more of these to come. Now, on my left, we're starting off with Ethan Sohn, principal from the Toyota Ventures Climate Fund investment team. Ethan is responsible for sourcing startups and evaluating and closing investments in innovative climate startups with solutions that can potentially help Toyota achieve carbon neutrality. Second, in the middle, we have Professor Gil Tall. Gil is a professor in the Department of Environmental Science and Policy at the University of California, Davis. where he directs the Electric Vehicle Research Center. His research focuses on the adoption, the use, and policy support needed for sustainable transportation technologies, providing guidance to policymakers and industry. And finally, on the end, we have Dr. Laura Libby, a manager in the human-centered AI team at TRI, the Toyota Research Institute, where her team builds technologies to scale and accelerate the science of behavior change in the real world. So with that, let's dive in. Gil, I want to start with you here. The audience has a sense of just kind of how big this opportunity is and how important it is, but I'd love to have you unpack a little bit for us. How do you expect this opportunity to evolve moving forward? In your research, in the literature, what have you seen in terms of how this VIO emission space could change as electrification continues, and how might that vary for a place like the US compared to other parts of the world?
Yeah, that's a great question, because our starting point is that we would like to electrify the new car sales. But as we have seen before, there are more than 1 billion cars on the road that we need to also address. And we always look at it as we certify a vehicle, we send it out, and that's the end of it. But there is a great opportunity. These vehicles usually are getting less and less efficient over time. Can we reverse it? Can we make them even more efficient over time? And for many years, there were no studies on it, no regulation. It was just they're on the road, and that's the end of it. But we see a lot of opportunities. We see an opportunities on the behavior side. We see an opportunities on the technology side. Yeah. And as you said, we see an opportunity on changing this fleet of how many cars and retire them on time. When every vehicle on the road, what's important for us is measuring how many more tons of GHG we will see from these vehicles through the lifetime of this car. So it's not just it's the most inefficient vehicles we would like to retire, but the most inefficient that will be used much more in the next couple of years that we would like to retire, retrofit, and change.
Absolutely. And ideally, in order to reduce the emissions from the transport sector, we need to make sure that we are not only adding kind of cleaner vehicles, but actually able to replace the vehicles that are already on the road, right? So just to clarify, in your research, Gil, have you seen any distinctions, any variation in terms of that replacement rate versus additional aspect of these clean electric vehicles?
Yeah, in the US, we are living in a really, really interesting world when we have more cars than drivers on the road. And we would like, as I said, to find these cars that are the most emitting ones and find a way to retire them early. It's not a one-to-one substitution. Usually the owner of this car is not going to the dealership and buying the brand new EV. We are changing this entire fleet, and we're changing it both from the top, selling new EVs, and from the bottom, retiring the most emitting ones. It's not an easy task. It's a very expensive task, and we need to make sure that we get the maximum impact when we are doing it.
Yeah, definitely. So the scale of the problem is large. There are challenges to consider. I'm curious to bring you and Ethan to this conversation. So there is this large opportunity, this large source of carbon that exists. We don't see so many solutions out there that are ready to decarbonize the space. And I'm curious, from your perspective as an investor, what does the flow of capital look like into this market? And are there any limitations that are preventing solutions from really thriving?
Yeah. So I'll give the perspective from kind of startup innovation side of things. And I think there are solutions. Low carbon fuels that was brought up a little bit earlier, which we think is one of the most promising solutions out there to decarbonize vehicles on the road. And there are some portfolio companies under Toyota Ventures umbrella that I'm happy to talk about later in the session. But when you ask them, like, what application are you working on? Where is the demand coming from? It's unfortunately not ground fuels. It's all sustainable aviation fuel, so on the SAF. So I think that's where, from my perspective, a lot of innovation that I'm seeing in here that could have potential applicability to ground fuel side of things, it's all being diverted towards SAF. And there are several reasons. One of them being aviation, being a very hard to decarbonize sector. The policy environment, including kind of the blending requirements and the refuel over in EU. Those are the things that are driving that. And scaling up technologies like that, building big production fuel facilities at commercial scale, it requires a lot of capital. And startups, if you know one thing about them, is that they don't have the luxury of all the time and resources. They will go where there's product market fit. Hence, that's what we're seeing in the market today. But to end on a kind of positive note, the thing is that in the long term, all of these will trickle down, I think, eventually to ground fuel side of things, because many of these pathways kind of share the same upstream processes. So if you have increase in conversion efficiencies, or if you're able to increase the amount of feedstock that's required to produce low carbon fuels, that'll benefit both applications. And that's why we've been happy, as even though we're Toyota Ventures, to invest in low carbon fuel startups, whereas SAF is kind of their first application.
Understood. Yeah. So there's a lot of capital needed, and there are other sectors that are maybe receiving a little bit more attention, a little bit more capital flow now, but we're optimistic it'll trickle down to other sectors as well. Gil, to come back to you real quick, I'm curious from a framework perspective, right? Are there any obstacles, or are there any frameworks that would be helpful to bring in more attention to this space? And are there any examples that you've seen of places where measuring real-world emissions and quantifying that has helped drive progress in decarbonization?
Yeah, so we have an example that is a very controversial example of today's plug-in hybrids. A lot of discussion about the performance of plug-in hybrids around the world, a lot of back and forth with the regulation. Do we advance them as part of the solution? Do we push them away? Because the performance, what we expected that they will do, what they're actually doing was very different. We can always ask, did we expect the right thing? Can we change it? But we are studying now a different perspective, and I know that I'm not going to gain a lot of friends on the car companies, but one way to change the perspective is to use their performance to change policy. So in Europe, the emission of plug-in hybrids on the road, the amount of energy they are using from electricity and from gas, is informing the credits that the car companies are receiving. So it's not based on your dyno and some utility factor that you calculate, but every year, all the new cars sold for any car company, Toyota, Honda, and others, need to report their actual performance to the governments, the states, the countries, and we can change the policy based on the road performance. And I think that it's only the first step. We should think about performance-based regulation for the entire fleet. Plug-in hybrids are the first step, but we need a leader. And I think that the car companies are my number one group to be the leaders of performance-based regulation.
Gotcha. So there are examples in other applications, like you said, in other regions of where real-world emissions are driving changes that can help decarbonize. So these types of frameworks, I imagine, can take a long time to develop. So Laura, I want to bring you in here, and I'm going to give you the challenging task of trying to provide a bit more hope, right? So I'd love to understand today, tomorrow, are there any low-hanging fruit options that can help with decarbonizing vehicles in operation in the near term without significant inflow of capital, to Ethan's point, or significant changes to policy, to Gil's point? Are there any examples that you've seen in your research?
Yes, so a big opportunity that we see and that we are working on actively is around who's behind the wheel of the vehicles on the road today. Because it turns out that for any powertrain, whether you're driving an electric vehicle or a gas vehicle, the way that you're operating that vehicle can have a big impact on carbon emissions. So for instance, there has been research showing that when a gas vehicle driver takes
eco-driving behaviors, there is up to a 30% reduction in tailpipe emissions for that vehicle. And then in our work, as you heard about a few minutes ago, even with electric vehicles, there is still an opportunity for people's charging behaviors to be greener, to be more carbon neutral. So plug-in hybrids is a great example. If plug-in hybrids are not as efficient as they were maybe promised to be, there could be a number of explanations. And it turns out that one explanation is that people simply don't plug them in as at the optimum amount or the maximum amount that they could be doing. Why is that? Why would somebody buy a plug-in hybrid vehicle and not plug it in? And there can be a lot of reasons for that. We find in our research that people who own plug-in hybrid vehicles in the US today, at the very least, are motivated to drive it on electric as much as they can. And they do tend to have access to reliable charging, and they have this intention to plug it in every day. But they don't, because people are imperfect and they can be busy and forget to charge, or they may not understand that there is an additional public charging station that would be convenient to a trip that they're taking. So we build low cost or no cost behavioral intervention to try to bridge that gap between what people intended to do with their PHEVs and what they actually do, to help them meet that intention with their actions. And when we do that, we find that people can actually charge more frequently, which should bring down the carbon emissions of PHEVs. And when they do that, again, as you saw earlier, they feel better about their vehicles too, because they are now aligning their behaviors with their values. So these types of behavioral interventions, they are, when I say low cost or no cost, what I mean is that, relative to infrastructure initiatives, new technology development, deployment, adoption, these are slow, these are costly. They're vital, but they are slow and costly. Whereas these types of behavioral interventions, they are affordable and they can be deployed now, today, often through software.
I think that's very encouraging, Laura. When we think about a portfolio approach of solutions, you hear a lot about the different powertrain options, but I think here it's a great example of if we need folks to charge more often, there is, of course, the infrastructure solution which is needed. We need more workplace charging, we need more public charging, but there are also lower cost or no cost, to your point, solutions, behavioral interventions that can also improve the real world kind of carbon performance of these cars as well. I think that's a really encouraging point. So I want to come back to some of the points that you mentioned, Ethan, on the carbon neutral fuel side. You mentioned it's a kind of a promising space, and I'd love to unpack that a bit further. What specific opportunities are you seeing, have you been involved with in your role at Toyota Ventures in that emerging technology space?
Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic that there's a lot of promising technologies out there that's driving down the cost of low carbon fuels. Some examples on the electro fuels or e-fuel side of things, our portfolio company, Airco, has a distinct, unique catalyst that can convert CO2 into liquid hydrocarbons in a much more efficient single-step process. We have a portfolio company called Oxylus Energy that's also converting CO2 into low-carbon fuels without the need for hydrogen as a direct input. Synergy Plasmonics and kind of the intersection between e-fuels and biofuel space, where they have a photocatalytic platform that allows them to convert biogas into renewable diesel without a lot of pre-processing required. And on the kind of the traditional biofuels side of things, we're paying a lot of attention to that, whether it's better microbes, more durable enzymes, or more efficient bioprocessing. We're watching out for all the innovation there. But talked about some of the challenges earlier, but Another one is, what is required, right? The inputs that are required that drive these processes. Happy to talk about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of innovative technology being pursued, but yeah, there are a variety of things maybe upstream that are needed in order for those to scale, and that's kind of the elephant in the room, right? I think we hear a lot about the cost of these fuels, but we talked about this being a 1.5 billion vehicle problem. So you need a lot of fuel to be able to make a meaningful dent in that. So I know, Gil, you looked at some of this in the literature as well. I was curious if you had any initial findings or things that you've observed on that kind of upstream volume potential and scalability side that you'd want to bring in here.
Yeah, so I will say that I'm not an expert on that, but my colleague that looks at it quite a lot, I was sitting with him, and his message, I think that is also my message, is that we will have to pick which industry or which segment is the best one for using the amount of alternative fuels we will have. We will not be able to use them in all segments, but when we're looking at light-duty vehicles, we have additional values there of local emissions. We have how easy it is, and we also have the goal of different countries to, for example, you have a plug-in hybrid, it's already very clean. Do we want to get it to zero by also changing the fuel that we are using for the engine? So there is still a lot to do on prioritizing, and light-duty vehicles are still in the game for that.
Yeah, so given that there may be some supply limitations, prioritizing where they can be most effective may be necessary. And Ethan, from the companies you've seen, what are some of the approaches being taken to try to relax some of that supply constraints and address those feedstocks?
Yeah, there's surely innovation there too. So when we think about biofuels as an example, biomass feedstock availability is a big thing. I mean, theoretically, there is a lot out there, but if you think about what is not competing with food, what is being aggregated at a meaningful scale, what lets you avoid some of the big transportation costs that might be involved, it is the pie gets smaller and smaller. So we have a portfolio company called Living Carbon that has developed the gene editing technology to help trees grow faster with higher energy density, higher biomass as well. And that has allowed biofuel producers to really get a very predictable, homogeneous supply of biomass that's needed. On the e-fuel side of things, of course, it's the electricity, right? So that's why we have actually been looking at clean firm power generation as something that's actually strategic for Toyota. Yeah, those are what we do.
Yeah, so those are clean firm power relevant not only for the data centers that y'all have heard a lot about this week and beyond, but also for us as well.
Yeah.
And so let's say we're successful and these companies are able to scale up and we have lots of low carbon or carbon neutral fuel stations available, and even better as a drop-in fuel where you can put it into your existing vehicle today. I imagine there's a lot of consumer behavior factors here that will determine how effective in the real world this will be in driving down emissions. And Laura, I'm curious if you see any overlap between the work that you and your team have done on charging and nudging charging behavior and how some of those concepts could be applied to nudging consumer behavior to fuel their vehicle more cleanly as well.
Yeah, there are, there's a wealth of research in behavioral science that shows that certain interventions work well for different types of behaviors. So one thing when you're thinking about how can we shape behavior so that people are making more carbon neutral choices in how they're using their vehicles, you have to match the intervention to the behavior change problem. So for instance, if we need people to make a shift in their habits, like we've been doing with charging behaviors, that might call for a specific type or set of interventions. Whereas if we need somebody to opt into something new, for instance, a managed charging program where it's sort of like set it and forget it, and all of a sudden your car is being charged at optimal times, eco-friendly times, that's a one and done behavior, which has a sort of a different set of interventions that may be more effective there. And I think when people think about interventions, something that often comes up is financial incentives. So, providing discounts or directly paying people to take to make different choices. And these have a place in a behavior change strategy. We have to be careful about when and where and how we use them. One example is, when we think about providing subsidies for, for instance, biofuels, we might find that people would really respond well to a large subsidy. But the problem with subsidies is that they're expensive and they maybe can't last forever. So when that subsidy goes away, you might see what we call like a backfiring effect, where people who had been using those more carbon neutral fuels may suddenly feel that they are much more expensive and they'd be much less willing to fuel up using those methods. And so we have to be thoughtful and careful about how we design these types of programs.
Absolutely. So financial incentives can be effective, but the way you design these is important. And I think the distinction you mentioned between like recurring behavior versus one-off is definitely an important one to appreciate as well. I recognize we're getting low on the clock here. So one point I wanted to quickly mention is, fuels are certainly not the only solution that could be viable, right? And Gail, I know your colleagues and yourself have looked into some alternatives. For example, retrofitting, right? So converting internal combustion engines to battery electric vehicles, converting hybrids to plug-in hybrids, converting internal combustion engines to flex fuel vehicles. I'm curious what you've seen in the literature in terms of where maybe those are being tried and where they may have potential versus where maybe they have more.
We see some potentials with fleets. We see some potentials with large numbers, not with household owning vehicles. We would like to keep them on the road for many years after retrofitting, which sometimes just better to sell a new car. But it's also important when we're looking on this used car going to the global south. And sometimes there are opportunities there in making them cleaner. Kind of going back to the idea of retiring or retrofitting, but doing something with the vehicles already on the road. And when we are talking about gas cars, we always try to accelerate the retirement. And leapfrogging countries will go directly to electric as possible, so help that. It will be a couple of years from now, we'll sit here again and said when it's come to electric car, we would like to slow the retirement, so we'll have to reverse our policies, and we need to be ready for that.
Absolutely. And we heard earlier, in the panel before this about from Esther about this idea of once you bring something back in, you can maybe retrofit it and modify it. And it also brings up the question of how does this program interface with like buyback programs, for example, where you encourage customers to trade in their older, more polluting vehicles, and then what happens afterwards? Do you recycle it? Do you upgrade or retrofit it to make it cleaner? Lots of options available to us. So maybe as a final comment, we have a panel of folks with diverse background and even more diverse audience here. Ethan, I'm curious maybe for a final word in terms of where do you see the most ripe opportunity for collaboration? Where do we need folks from NGOs and academia and big corporations and startups and investors to work together?
So I'll talk about the corporation/startup side of things. Corporations like Toyota have a lot of capabilities, right? So a good example is manufacturing. There's not a lot that does manufacturing, not a lot of companies out there that does manufacturing better than Toyota. And that is actually one of the ways that we've tried to help our portfolio companies on the startup side of things, getting them connected to the right people within Toyota who can help them guide them in the right direction on that side of thing, which has been actually very monumental in terms of their scale-up journey and all realizing the technology's potential.
Fantastic. Well, before they start playing the music to take us off, thank you all for the great discussion and thank you all for the time.
For some closing remarks, please welcome back to the stage Sandra Phillips.
So I want to thank you all for joining today's important discussion, and also want to thank the terrific panelists that you just heard. So we've explored emerging frameworks, innovative solutions, and the critical role of future and existing vehicles that are already on the road. Toyota and our collaborators are committed to advancing these efforts through technology and bold thinking. And together, we can unlock the full potential of sustainable mobility and drive meaningful change. And we look forward to continuing this collective journey with all of you. Thank you again.